The vast command center of the Coalition's last stronghold hummed with nervous energy as screens flickered with endless streams of data. Admiral Kita stood motionless before the massive holographic display, his aged hands gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. The map before him told a story of defeat, one that had become all too familiar over the past few years. Red markers spread like a disease across the three-dimensional star chart, each one representing another system lost to the enemy. The swarm, that's what they called the unstoppable force that had emerged from the darkness between the stars. Not because they resembled insects or operated like them, but because of their endless hunger to consume and grow. Kaita watched as another system blinked from blue to red. 37 systems lost in just one solar cycle. Each defeat made the swarm stronger, as they absorbed not just territory but technology and knowledge from their victims. They learned, they adapted, and they grew more powerful with every world they conquered. The Admiral's weathered face reflected the red glow of the warning markers. His dark eyes, once bright with the promise of exploration and discovery, now held only exhaustion and worry. The Coalition, an alliance of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, had never faced anything like this before. Captain Ji-min approached silently, her usual confident stride replaced by hesitant steps. She had served as Kita's second-in-command for 15 years, and he had never seen her look so shaken. "Admiral," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we've lost contact with the Centauri defense line." The words hit Kita like a physical blow, making him stumble slightly. The Centauri line had been their masterpiece, a defensive position that incorporated the best technology from 12 different species. It was supposed to be unbreakable. They had staked everything on it holding. "Confirm it," he ordered, though he already knew the truth. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on the Centauri sector. Where there had once been a string of heavily fortified worlds, there was now only silence. 1,000,000,000,000 lives, gone in an instant. The emergency council was called within the hour. Representatives from the surviving coalition worlds gathered in the grand chamber, their faces showing varying degrees of fear and desperation. Some attended via hologram, their images flickering as communication networks struggled under the strain of constant swarm attacks. Supreme Commander Haynul stood at the center of it all. She was younger than most of the other leaders, but her presence commanded respect. She had risen through the ranks quickly, proving herself time and again in battles against the swarm. Now she looked at the assembled leaders with determination in her eyes. "The Centauri line has fallen," she announced, her voice strong despite the devastating news. "Our strongest defenses, our most advanced technologies, our bravest warriors, none of it was enough. The swarm adapts to everything we throw at them. They learn our strategies faster than we can develop new ones. They absorb our technology and turn it against us." Murmurs of despair rippled through the chamber. Kita watched as some of the holographic representatives flickered more intensely, their signals growing weaker as the swarm's influence spread. Haynul raised her hand for silence. "But there may be hope," she continued. "We have focused our search for allies among the advanced civilizations, those whose technology matches or exceeds our own. In doing so, we have ignored vast regions of space, dismissed as too primitive for contact." The chamber erupted in confused discussions. Kita understood their skepticism. How could primitive civilizations help against an enemy that had defeated their most advanced weapons? "The swarm's greatest strength is their ability to adapt to and overcome advanced technology," Haynul explained. "But perhaps that is also their weakness. They expect logical progression, predictable patterns of technological development. What if we could find something they cannot predict? Something so different from their expectations that they cannot adapt to it?" Keita felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in months. He stepped forward, supporting Haynul's proposal. "There are thousands of unexplored systems in the sectors we've deemed primitive," he said. "We've detected signs of civilization in many of them, but never made contact because they hadn't achieved certain technological benchmarks. Then that's where we'll look. Hay Newell declared, her decision final. Prepare scout ships immediately. We need to find something the swarm has never encountered before, something they cannot predict or understand. Our survival depends on it. As the council dispersed, Kita returned to his post at the holographic display. Somewhere out there, among the countless stars, he hoped they would find their salvation. They had to. The alternative was the extinction of everything they had ever known or loved. The red markers continued to spread across the map, but now there was purpose in their mission. They weren't just running anymore. They were searching for hope in the most unlikely of places. Scout Commander Du Hyun's fingers hovered over the ship's controls, ready to jump to the next system. The small blue-green planet spinning below his cloaked vessel seemed unremarkable at first glance. Its inhabitants still relied on primitive rocket technology and fossil fuels for energy. By coalition standards, they were barely out of their Stone Age. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the sheer amount of artificial satellites orbiting the planet, or the constant stream of radio signals bouncing through space. These humans, as they called themselves, never seemed to stop communicating. Do Hyun instructed his ship's AI to begin collecting and translating their broadcasts. What started as a routine survey quickly turned into hours of fascinated observation. The more he watched, the more his excitement grew. The humans were at war, not with aliens or advanced civilizations, but with themselves. They had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history, developing and refining combat strategies without the aid of advanced technology. Their military history was a tapestry of innovation born from necessity. "You need to see this," he transmitted to Admiral Kita, sending along a compressed data package of his findings. "These humans, they're different from any species we've encountered." The Admiral's response was immediate, ordering Do Hyun to maintain position and continue gathering data. Over the next several days, Do Hyun and his crew immersed themselves in human military history. They watched documentaries about ancient battles, studied modern military doctrines, and analyzed current conflicts across the planet. What they found astounded them. Humans had developed thousands of different ways to fight, adapting their strategies based on terrain, resources, and the nature of their opponents. They had concepts like guerrilla warfare, where smaller forces could effectively combat larger ones. They understood psychological warfare, using fear and uncertainty as weapons. Most fascinating was their concept of asymmetric warfare, the idea that a weaker force could defeat a stronger one by exploiting unexpected weaknesses. Do Hyun watched footage of primitive fighters using simple improvised devices to disable advanced military vehicles. He saw how human armies adapted to use their enemies' strengths against them. Their entire history is filled with smaller forces defeating larger ones, Do Hyun reported in his daily briefing to Kita. They don't just accept defeat when faced with a superior opponent. They find ways to change the rules of engagement. The Coalition's analysts were particularly intrigued by humanity's constant technological adaptation. When faced with a new weapon or defense, humans didn't just develop counters. They found creative ways to repurpose existing technology for unexpected uses. Do Hyun watched as more coalition ships arrived in the system, maintaining their cloak while studying this remarkable species. The humans' information networks were a goldmine of military thinking. They had developed entire fields of study dedicated to understanding and improving their combat effectiveness. What truly set humans apart was their embrace of chaos. Unlike the Coalition's carefully planned and coordinated military operations, human warfare often thrived on unpredictability. They understood that perfect solutions weren't always necessary. Sometimes, causing enough confusion and disruption was enough to win. They're still fighting with projectile weapons and combustion engines, one of Do Hyun's analysts noted, but their strategic thinking is incredibly sophisticated. They understand warfare on a fundamental level that transcends technology. The Coalition's military observers were particularly impressed by humanity's ability to innovate under pressure. When faced with seemingly impossible situations, humans had a remarkable tendency to find unconventional solutions. They didn't view combat as a simple equation of superior force or technology. Do Hyun compiled hundreds of examples of human ingenuity in warfare. The Battle of Thermopylae, where a small force held off a massive army through clever use of terrain. The development of aircraft carriers, which revolutionized naval warfare. The constant evolution of cyber warfare, where humans found new ways to attack and defend in virtual space. These beings, Do Hyun wrote in his final report to Admiral Kita, might appear primitive by our standards, but their understanding of warfare is anything but. They don't just fight. They reinvent the very nature of combat to suit their needs. The swarm adapts to patterns and technology, but humans adapt to anything and everything. The implications were clear. The coalition had been fighting the swarm with logic and advanced technology, trying to outthink and outgun an enemy that could absorb and improve upon any conventional strategy. But humans, they fought with unpredictability and innovation. They embraced chaos as a strategic advantage. As Do Hyun finished his report, he added one final observation. The swarm has never encountered anything like humanity. They might be our best hope, not because of their technology, but because of how they think. They don't just break the rules of warfare, they rewrite them entirely. The message shot through space toward the coalition's command center, carrying with it the first real hope they'd had since the war began. Perhaps these primitive warriors, these masters of adaptive warfare, could show them a new way to fight. Perhaps chaos, not technology, was the key to defeating the swarm. The coalition officers stood nervously as General Sunmai walked through their flagship's command center. Her small frame seemed almost comically out of place among the towering alien technology, but her presence filled the room. While other human delegates gaped at the massive ship's interior, Sunmi barely glanced at the advanced displays and holographic interfaces surrounding her. Instead, she focused intently on the tactical readouts, her eyes narrowing as she studied the battle patterns. The alien officers shifted uncomfortably as she asked increasingly pointed questions about their combat strategies and military protocols. "Show me your last major engagement with the swarm," she requested, her voice calm but commanding. The coalition's tactical officer quickly brought up a holographic replay of their most recent defeat. Sun Mai watched in silence as the perfect formations of coalition ships moved against the swarm's forces, following textbook military doctrine. "I see the problem," she said finally, turning to face Admiral Kita. "You're fighting them like they're a conventional force. That's why you're losing." The Admiral bristled slightly at her blunt assessment. "Our tactics are based on thousands of years of advanced military theory," he explained. "We're using the most sophisticated battle computers ever developed." Sun Mi nodded. "Exactly. You're being predictable, logical. The swarm can analyze and adapt to any pattern you throw at them because you're fighting exactly how they expect you to fight." The human delegation that followed brought proposals that made the coalition's military strategists question their sanity. The humans suggested creating computer viruses designed not to destroy, but to introduce random errors into systems. They wanted to use electromagnetic pulses to temporarily disrupt neural networks rather than trying to destroy them completely. Most shocking was their insistence on installing manual overrides on the coalition's most advanced weapon systems. Sometimes, Sun Mai explained to the horrified weapons officers, "You need to be able to do something stupid. Something no rational computer would ever suggest." The coalition's war room erupted in debates as human military advisors presented their ideas. They proposed using outdated technology alongside advanced systems, arguing that the swarm would have trouble adapting to both simultaneously. They suggested intentionally creating communication noise to mask their true signals. "Your ships are too perfect," Sun Mai observed, watching simulations of coalition battle formations. "They move in perfect synchronization, respond instantly to threats. The swarm can predict everything you're going to do because you're operating like machines." She pulled up footage from Earth's military history, showing guerrilla warfare tactics, asymmetric combat scenarios, and battles won through unconventional strategies. "Look at how humans fight," she said. "We use terrain, weather, confusion, fear. We make our enemies fight on our terms, not theirs." The coalition officers watched in fascination as she explained concepts like fog of war and calculated disorder. These were ideas their advanced military training had never considered. The intentional introduction of chaos into battle plans. "Chaos," Sun Mai explained, standing before the coalition's gathered admirals and generals, "is humanity's natural state. We thrive in it. Your enemy can't adapt to what we do, because even we don't know what we'll do next." To demonstrate her point, she ran a simulation using human battle tactics against a simplified model of swarm behavior. The coalition officers watched in amazement as the unpredictable movements and seemingly random actions of the human forces confused and ultimately overwhelmed the swarm's adaptive algorithms. "Your technology isn't the problem," Sun Mai continued. "It's how you're using it. You're trying to outthink an enemy that can think faster than you. Instead, we need to make them stop thinking altogether, overwhelm their ability to analyze and adapt." She proposed a complete overhaul of coalition military doctrine. Ships would no longer move in perfect formation, but would operate with controlled randomness. Communication protocols would include intentional irregularities. Combat units would be given the freedom to improvise and adapt on the fly. "It goes against everything we've been taught," one coalition officer protested. "Our entire military structure is based on precision and coordination." Sun Mai smiled. "Exactly. And that's exactly what the swarm expects. They've adapted to your precision. They've learned your patterns. But chaos. True, human chaos. That's something they've never encountered before." As the day drew to a close, Sun Mai stood before the massive viewing window of the coalition flagship, watching the stars. Behind her, coalition officers were already beginning to implement some of her suggestions, introducing controlled randomness into their systems. "Are you certain this will work?" Admiral Kitai asked, joining her at the window. "No," Sun Mai replied honestly. "And that's precisely why it might. The swarm has never faced an enemy that embraces uncertainty. They've never fought someone who turns chaos into a weapon." The stars twinkled silently as the coalition began its transformation, learning to fight not with perfection, but with humanity's greatest weapon, unpredictability. The Proxima Centauri system blazed with weapons fire as Colonel Minho stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching his unconventional battle plan unfold. His fleet of 50 ships moved in patterns that made the coalition's tactical computers issue constant error messages. He had turned those warnings off hours ago. "Launch the decoys," Minho ordered, his voice steady despite the tension filling the bridge. 20 ships, their AI systems deliberately infected with human-designed viruses, broke formation and charged directly at the swarm's front lines. These ships were old, already damaged from previous battles, but they served their purpose perfectly. The swarm responded exactly as Minho had predicted. Their ships moved to intercept the incoming threats, their perfect formation shifting to analyze and adapt to this new attack. But the corrupted AI in the decoy ships made them move erratically, their trajectories impossible to predict. "Begin radio broadcast sequence," Minho commanded. His communications officer activated dozens of outdated radio transmitters they had salvaged from Earth's old satellites. The signals were primitive, using frequencies the swarm had likely dismissed as irrelevant centuries ago. The effect was immediate. The swarm's advanced communication networks, designed to process and adapt to the most sophisticated transmission protocols, struggled to handle the flood of simple, chaotic radio waves. Their ships began to show signs of confusion, their movements becoming less coordinated. Minho watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The swarm's perfect formations, usually an unstoppable force of synchronized destruction, were starting to break apart. Their ships hesitated, their adaptive algorithms overwhelmed by the combination of erratic movements and ancient communications. "Second phase," he ordered. Prepare the debris launchers. This was the riskiest part of his plan. 10 of his ships, their holds filled with wreckage from previous battles, began systematically destroying themselves. The explosions weren't meant to damage the enemy. They were calculated to spread debris in specific patterns, creating artificial asteroid fields that forced the swarm to constantly recalculate their movements. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice tight with tension, "the swarm's response time is dropping. They're taking almost 3 seconds to adapt to new threats." 3 seconds didn't sound like much, but for an enemy that usually responded instantaneously, it was an eternity. The swarm's greatest strength, their ability to analyze and adapt to any situation, had become their weakness. They couldn't process the sheer illogic of the human tactics fast enough. Minho's remaining ships pressed the advantage, using the chaos they had created to launch precise strikes at the confused enemy. They didn't move in formation, but instead attacked individually, each captain making split-second decisions based on the changing situation. "Look at them," Minho said quietly, pointing to the tactical display. "They're trying to find patterns where there are none. They're looking for logic in chaos." The swarm's ships began to show signs of genuine distress. Their attempts to adapt to one threat left them vulnerable to others. When they tried to process the old radio signals, they missed the debris fields. When they adjusted for the erratic movement of the decoy ships, they failed to notice the real attacks coming from unexpected angles. For the first time in recorded history, the swarm began to retreat. Their perfect formation had devolved into something almost human in its desperation to escape the chaos that surrounded them. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "Admiral Kita is hailing us." Minho activated the communication channel. The Admiral's holographic image appeared, his expression a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Colonel," he said, "your tactics, they shouldn't have worked. They violated every principle of space combat we've developed." "That's the thing about humanity," Minho replied, watching as the last of the swarm ships jumped to faster-than-light speed, retreating from the system. "We don't need to win perfectly. We just need to win." The bridge crew erupted in cheers as the reality of their victory sank in. They had done it. They had driven the swarm back, not with superior technology or perfect strategy, but with chaos and unpredictability. Minho allowed himself a small smile as he began composing his after-action report. He would have to explain how they had won by deliberately damaging their own ships, using obsolete technology, and ignoring centuries of established military doctrine. The coalition would struggle to understand, but they couldn't argue with the results. "Prepare for pursuit," he ordered. "But first, have engineering introduce some random errors into our engine output. Let's keep them guessing." As his fleet regrouped, preparing to chase the retreating enemy, Minho reflected on how far they had come. The coalition had learned to embrace humanity's way of fighting, to find strength in unpredictability. They had learned that sometimes the best way to win was to stop trying to be perfect. The Battle of Proxima Centauri would be remembered not just as their first victory against the swarm, but as the moment when the galaxy learned that chaos could be more powerful than order. Humanity's gift to the coalition wasn't advanced technology or superior numbers. It was the understanding that sometimes the best strategy was to have no strategy at all. Director Tahi walked through the coalition's new combat training facility, watching as alien officers struggled to unlearn centuries of military discipline. In one simulation chamber, crews were practicing randomized attack patterns that made their ship's computers constantly issue warning alerts. In another, weapons specialists were modifying advanced targeting systems to occasionally miss on purpose. "You're still thinking too logically," she called out to a group of coalition commanders practicing evasive maneuvers. "Stop trying to calculate the perfect escape route. Sometimes the worst path is the best path." The facility, built on an asteroid at the edge of coalition space, had become the center of their new military doctrine. Here, under Tahi's guidance, they were rewriting everything they knew about warfare. The walls were covered with quotes from human military history, reminding everyone that chaos could be a weapon. "Show me what you've done with the missile guidance systems," she asked a nervous-looking coalition engineer. He pulled up a holographic display showing their latest modifications. The missiles now followed unpredictable flight paths, making random course corrections that no defense system could anticipate. "We also introduced varying delays in the detonation sequences," the engineer explained. "Some explode early, some late. The swarm can't calculate the blast patterns anymore." Tahi nodded approvingly. This was exactly what they needed. Weapons that behaved so irrationally that even their creators couldn't predict them. The Coalition's advanced tactical computers were being reprogrammed to embrace uncertainty rather than eliminate it. Reports from the front lines showed the strategy was working. The swarm, used to enemies that fought with logic and precision, couldn't handle the Coalition's new approach. Their adaptive algorithms failed when faced with actions that defied mathematical prediction. In one recent battle, a Coalition fleet had won by having half their ships shut down all systems randomly during the fight, appearing as debris before suddenly reactivating. The swarm's attempt to analyze and adapt to this tactic had left them vulnerable to conventional attacks from other directions. "Your ships are learning to dance," Tahi told a group of Coalition admirals during their daily briefing. "Not the precise, calculated movements you're used to, but a wild, unpredictable dance that confuses and disorients the enemy." The Coalition's victory count began to rise. Territories that had been lost to the swarm were being reclaimed. The enemy's perfect formations began to show signs of hesitation, their responses becoming slower as they encountered more and more illogical situations. In her quarters late one night, Tahi reviewed footage from the latest battles. The swarm's ships, once an unstoppable force of synchronized destruction, now moved with visible uncertainty. They would pause briefly before engaging, as if trying to make sense of the chaos before them. "They're learning fear," she wrote in her report to the Coalition Council. "Not the logical assessment of danger they're programmed for, but true, human-like fear of the unknown." The council chamber fell silent as Tahi presented her findings. The massive holographic displays showed battle after battle where chaos had triumphed over order. Coalition ships performing maneuvers that should have been suicidal yet somehow worked. Weapons firing in patterns that made no tactical sense but achieved victory. "Humanity's gift to the galaxy," she told the assembled leaders, "isn't our technology or our strength. It's our unpredictability. We've taught you to embrace the one thing the swarm can never understand: the power of illogical action." Some council members still struggled with the concept. They had spent their entire lives pursuing perfection, eliminating variables, seeking absolute control. Now they were being told to do the opposite. "Look at your own history," Tahi reminded them. "Every great civilization has faced moments where traditional tactics failed. The ones who survived were those who dared to try something new, something their enemies couldn't predict." As if to prove her point, news arrived of another victory. A Coalition fleet had defeated a swarm force 3 times its size by broadcasting thousands of conflicting orders on all frequencies, creating a communication chaos that the enemy couldn't process. The Coalition's military was transforming. Ships that once moved in perfect formation now scattered like leaves in a storm. Weapons designed for precision were modified to be intentionally imprecise. Combat computers were programmed to occasionally ignore the optimal solution in favor of random alternatives. "We're not just fighting the swarm anymore," Tahi explained to her staff. "We're fighting their fundamental nature, their need to understand and adapt to everything they encounter. By becoming incomprehensible, we become unbeatable." As she watched the latest group of Coalition officers practice their new tactics, Tahi smiled. They were finally beginning to understand that victory didn't require perfection. Sometimes it required the courage to embrace imperfection, to dance on the edge of chaos where no logical enemy could follow. The tide of war had turned, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through humanity's greatest contribution to galactic warfare: the art of being unpredictable. Commander Jinwoo stood in the center of the Coalition's war room, surrounded by the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. The holographic display before him showed his proposed battle plan, a strategy so dangerous and unconventional that several officers had already walked out in protest. "You want us to deliberately infect our own ships with computer viruses?" Admiral Kita asked, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. "The same ships we'll be sending into battle." Jinwoo nodded, adjusting the display to show the modified virus code his team had developed. "Not just any viruses," he explained. "These are specifically designed to be unpredictable. They'll make our ships behave erratically, but in ways that we can still somewhat control." The room erupted in heated discussions. Coalition engineers argued about the technical impossibility of maintaining any control over infected systems. Security experts warned about the risks of the viruses spreading beyond their intended targets. "Think of it like a fever," Jinwoo said, raising his voice above the chaos. "When your body fights an infection, it sometimes makes itself worse to defeat the enemy. The fever feels terrible, but it's part of the cure." He pulled up footage from Earth's computer history, showing how early human viruses had overwhelmed sophisticated systems through sheer unpredictability. "The swarm's neural network is the most advanced system ever created," he continued. "But that's exactly why it's vulnerable to chaos." The plan was audacious. They would deliberately infect their entire attack fleet with these modified viruses. When the swarm attempted to analyze and adapt to their ships, they would unknowingly absorb the chaotic code into their own network. "We've tried fighting them with logic," Jinwoo explained. "We've tried fighting them with strength. Now we need to fight them with madness, a madness so complete that their perfect minds can't comprehend it." General Sunmai, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "I've reviewed the technical specifications," she announced. "The viruses are based on some of humanity's most notorious digital weapons, but modified to be even more unpredictable." The Coalition leaders looked at the simulation results with growing interest. The viruses would cause ships to execute random commands, fire weapons at unexpected moments, and broadcast nonsense data on all frequencies. But hidden within this chaos was a pattern, one that only human minds, accustomed to finding order in disorder, could recognize. "Once the viruses enter the swarm's neural network," Jinwoo continued, "they'll begin to spread. Each attempt by the swarm to analyze and eliminate them will only make them multiply faster. Their perfect system will become their perfect prison." Hours passed as Jinwoo answered questions and addressed concerns. He showed them how the infected ships would still be able to complete their mission, even if they appeared to be malfunctioning. He explained how the chaos would be controlled enough to prevent friendly fire, but random enough to confuse the enemy. Finally, Admiral Kita called for a vote. The Coalition had learned to trust human insanity over the past months of warfare. They had seen how unpredictability could triumph over perfect logic. One by one, they approved the plan. The preparation began immediately. Thousands of ships were systematically infected with the modified viruses, their crews trained to operate systems that no longer behaved predictably. Engineers learned to work with computers that sometimes ignored their commands. "This goes against everything we believe in," one Coalition captain complained during the preparation. "Our ships are supposed to be perfect machines, not chaos engines." Jinwoo smiled as he watched the infected fleet prepare for launch. "Perfection is predictable," he replied. "And anything predictable can be defeated. But chaos? Pure, human chaos. That's something even the swarm can't master." The launch day arrived. The infected fleet assembled at the jump point, their systems already showing signs of the virus's influence. Navigation computers plotted impossible courses only to correct them at the last second. Weapons systems cycled through targeting solutions at random. Jinwoo stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching as the fleet prepared to jump. The viruses in their systems were like a digital time bomb, ready to spread their chaos through the swarm's neural network. "Remember," he transmitted to the fleet, "when things start going wrong, That means everything is going right. Embrace the chaos. Let it flow through your ships and into the enemy. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, carrying humanity's digital plague toward the heart of the swarm. They were about to prove that sometimes the best weapon against a perfect enemy was imperfection itself. As they traveled toward their target, Jin Wu thought about how far they had come. The Coalition had learned to trust human madness, to believe in strategies that defied logic. Now they were about to launch their greatest gambit, using chaos itself as a weapon against an enemy that could only understand order. The fleet emerged from hyperspace near the swarm's central consciousness, their infected ships broadcasting their digital plague like a beacon. The final battle was about to begin, and for once, perfection was not their goal. They were bringing something far more powerful, humanity's gift for creating chaos. The command center fell silent as the first reports came in from the front lines. Admiral Kita and General Sunmai stood side by side, watching as the largest battle in galactic history unfolded before them. The holographic display showed thousands of ships engaged in what looked less like combat and more like a chaotic dance. The infected Coalition fleet had made contact with the swarm's central consciousness 3 days ago. Since then, time seemed to move differently for everyone involved. The human computer viruses had spread through the enemy's neural network faster than anyone had predicted, creating patterns of behavior that defied all logic and understanding. "Look there!" Sunmei pointed to a sector where swarm ships were firing at empty space, their targeting systems confused by phantom signals generated by the viruses. They're trying to fight enemies that don't exist while ignoring the real threats right in front of them. The swarm's central consciousness, a massive structure that housed the collective intelligence of their entire species, was visibly struggling. Its perfect crystalline surface flickered with unusual patterns as it attempted to process the flood of contradictory information flowing through its networks. Coalition officers watched in amazement as the enemy's legendary adaptation abilities began to work against them. Every attempt to counter the viruses only created new problems. When they tried to isolate infected systems, the quarantine protocols themselves became carriers of the chaos. "It's like watching a supercomputer try to divide by zero," one of the human technicians observed. "They keep attempting to find logical solutions to illogical problems." By the second day, the swarm's formations had completely broken down. Their ships moved in random patterns, firing weapons without clear targets, broadcasting conflicting orders across all frequencies. The perfect synchronization that had made them unstoppable was now their greatest weakness. The human viruses continued their work, spreading through the enemy's systems like a digital wildfire. They didn't destroy. They confused, disrupted, and created chaos. The swarm's adaptive algorithms, designed to learn from every encounter, were learning madness instead of strategy. Admiral Kita watched as another section of the swarm's fleet began firing on their own ships, their targeting systems corrupted beyond recognition. "I still don't understand how you knew this would work," he admitted to Sunmei. She smiled, her eyes fixed on the display. "We didn't. That's precisely why it did. The swarm expected us to have a plan they could analyze and counter. Instead, we gave them chaos they couldn't comprehend." On the third day, the swarm's central consciousness began to fragment. Its attempts to process the endless stream of contradictory data had created feedback loops that its logical systems couldn't resolve. Massive sections of its structure went dark as neural pathways collapsed under the strain of trying to make sense of the senseless. The end came not with a dramatic explosion, but with a quiet shutdown. The swarm's ships simply stopped moving, their controlling intelligence overwhelmed by the chaos humanity had introduced into their perfect system. The greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced was defeated not by superior firepower or technology, but by unpredictability itself. In the aftermath, as Coalition ships began the process of securing the abandoned swarm vessels, Sunmei wrote her final report to Earth's military command. She explained how humanity's greatest weakness, their tendency toward chaos and unpredictability, had proven to be their greatest strength. The Coalition's rebuilding efforts would take years, but something fundamental had changed in galactic civilization. The member species had learned that perfection wasn't always the answer. Sometimes, the path to victory required embracing imperfection, uncertainty, and chaos. Humanity's role in the galaxy was secured, not through technological advancement or military might, but through their unique ability to thrive in disorder. They became teachers, showing other species how to think unpredictably, how to find strength in uncertainty. As Sun Maid watched the stars from the command center window, she reflected on how far they had come. The Coalition had learned to trust human instincts, to believe in strategies that defied logic. They had discovered that in a universe of perfect systems and predictable patterns, chaos could be the most powerful weapon of all. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through the centuries. Sometimes victory didn't require being stronger or smarter than your enemy. Sometimes it just required being impossible to predict, impossible to understand. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. The power of chaos itself. The end.